Proof of her affair shocks entire family at the table. You know that sound? A fork clattering onto a plate? In that moment, it was the loudest sound in the world. Louder than the yelling that started. Louder than the tears that weren't far behind. Just like that, our family dinner, tradition we'd kept alive for 15 years, went from a cozy Norman Rockwell painting to an absolute battlefield. And yeah, I was the one who just set off the bomb. It's funny, isn't it? How life can feel so solid, like it's built on rock. That's how my marriage to Sarah felt. 15 years. Two great kids, a house in that quiet kind of suburb, you know, the one with the tire swing hanging from the big oak out front. We were Mark and Sarah. Everyone thought we had it all figured out. We weren't flashy, not like some folks. Our happiness was quieter, more lived in. You'd see it in the smiles we shared over coffee in the morning, the comfortable quiet on long drives, the way we knew each other's jokes so well we could jump in with the punchline. Sarah. God, she was my everything. She was smart, kind, and had this laugh that could just fill up a room and make you forget why you were down. An amazing mom, so patient, always coming up with creative things for the kids. She was the glue for our whole extended family, too. Always remembered birthdays, organized all the holiday get-togethers, smoothed over those little family tiffs that always happen. Our annual fall harvest dinner? That was her idea. It grew to include both our parents, our siblings, their partners. It was meant to be about togetherness, celebrating the ties that bind. Oh, the irony in that, huh? For years, that fortress we built felt strong. We had our storms, sure. Money worries, the stress of raising little kids, the odd argument that usually ended with us both tired, saying sorry, and promising to do better. But cheating? That was something that happened in other people's houses, a plot twist in a movie. It wasn't something that could ever touch us. I was so sure of that. So blissfully, stupidly sure. Looking back, the months leading up to that dinner were full of these tiny cracks, almost invisible at the time. She started being a bit too attached to her phone, had these late nights she said were for work projects I never really heard about. There was this subtle emotional distance I just chalked up to stress. She was volunteering more at some local charity, or at least that's what she told me. Sometimes she'd come home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, but it was so quick. I'd tell myself I was imagining things. We were busy. The kids had their activities, I had my own deadlines at work. It's way too easy to miss the signs when you're not looking for them, when the whole idea just seems completely alien to your world. Our family, the one that would eventually be sitting around that table, was a pretty typical bunch. My parents, John and Mary, are traditional. Loyalty and stability mean everything to them. Sarah's parents, Tom and Linda, are a bit more easygoing, but fiercely protective of their daughter. My sister, Emily, and her husband, David, were our closest friends, the ones we'd normally tell anything to. Sarah's brother, Michael, was the eternal bachelor, always with a new story or a new business idea. On the surface, we were the picture of family harmony. We got together, we ate, we laughed. We all played our parts. The dinner, the specific one, was our fall harvest dinner. Mid-October. The air was crisp, leaves were doing their colorful thing, and Sarah had been planning the menu for weeks. It was always her favorite. She loved the decorations, that feeling of abundance, having everyone she cared about together. This year, though, she seemed almost frantic about it, more determined than ever for it to be absolutely perfect. I can see now that this drive for perfection was probably a desperate try at papering over the huge cracks, trying to keep up the illusion of our strong fortress even while she knew its foundations were crumbling. I remember helping her set the table the night before. The good china, the silverware, that autumn centerpiece she'd spend hours on. She was humming this little tune, one I knew, and for a second, this wave of nostalgia just hit me. I longed for those simpler times, for that uncomplicated love I thought we still had. I even reached out, just touched her arm, trying to show. I don't know. Reassurance? Affection? She flinched. Just a tiny bit. So fast, I almost missed it. But I didn't. And that tiny, almost unnoticeable reaction? That was maybe the first little tremor before the earthquake. It was a small thing, but it joined all the other off-key notes in the symphony of our marriage, a symphony I was slowly realizing was horribly out of tune. But even then, even with that chill running down my spine, I couldn't have imagined how deep the betrayal went, or the devastating way it would all come out. The first real crack, the one I couldn't just ignore or explain away, showed up on a Tuesday. It was so ordinary, it was almost insulting. Sarah had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, a rare slip for her. She was usually so careful with her gadgets. She'd rushed off to one of her charity meetings, a phrase that was starting to leave a bad taste in my mouth. I was just making a cup of tea, thinking about a work deadline, when an email notification pinged. The subject line was innocent enough, next week's schedule. But the sender wasn't anyone from the charity I knew she was involved with. It was a name I didn't recognize. A man's name. Daniel. Curiosity, that sneaky little devil, started to get the better of me. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a new volunteer coordinator. But something about how jumpy she'd been lately, so guarded with her phone and computer, made me pause. I glanced at the door, made sure I was alone. My heart started beating faster. This felt wrong, like I was crossing a line. But then, a colder voice whispered, "What if the line's already been crossed?" I clicked on the email. It was short, almost blunt. "Can't do Tuesday. How about Wednesday? Same time, same place. Don't want to miss our strategy sessions." Strategy sessions. The quotation marks around it felt like a deliberate, mocking wink. What charity needed that kind of secret scheduling? What strategy was so top secret? My blood ran cold. It wasn't proof. Not really. Not yet. But it was a definite crack in the perfect picture. I quickly closed the laptop, my hands shaking a bit. I felt sick. Daniel. Who the hell was Daniel? And what were these strategy sessions? My mind was racing, trying to fit this new, unwelcome piece into the puzzle of Sarah's recent behavior. The late nights, the vague answers, the faint scent of cologne I'd sometimes catch on her clothes when she came home, a cologne that wasn't mine. Over the next few days, I turned into this unwilling detective in my own life. I started paying much closer attention. I noticed how she'd angle her phone away from me when she was texting, how she'd take calls in another room, her voice hushed. The charity meetings got more frequent, sometimes lasting late into the evening. When I asked for details, her answers were vague, almost dismissive. "Oh, just planning for the upcoming fundraiser," she'd say, not looking me in the eye. Or, "It's complicated, lots of moving parts." The fortress of our marriage, which had always seemed so unbreakable in my mind, now felt like it had a gaping hole in its defenses, and a chilling wind was blowing right through it. I felt this gnawing anxiety, this constant unease that settled deep in my stomach. Sleep became a luxury. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, Sarah breathing softly beside me, and wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I just being paranoid? Was I making a crisis out of nothing? I desperately wanted to believe that. I clung to the image of the Sarah I knew, the woman I loved for 15 years, the mother of my kids. Surely, she wouldn't, she couldn't. But that doubt, once it was planted, just grew. Its roots dug deeper with every passing day, every secretive text, every unexplained absence. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home, an outsider looking in on a life that was subtly, but profoundly, changing without my okay. The warmth that used to define us was being replaced by a coolness, a distance that felt both deliberate and deeply painful. And the name Daniel just echoed in my mind, a constant, unwelcome reminder of the crack that threatened to shatter everything I held dear. This wasn't just a crack anymore. It felt like the ground under my feet was starting to give way. That email was the spark, but what came next was a slow, agonizing burn. I couldn't confront her, not then. Not with something so thin. I needed more. I needed to be sure, even though the thought of what that certainty might mean absolutely terrified me. So, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I started to dig. It felt disgusting, like a betrayal in itself, but the fear of being played for a fool, of living a lie, was a much stronger push. I started with her phone. It felt like crossing some kind of sacred line, and my hands were shaking as I typed in the passcode I still knew. A small mercy, or maybe just an oversight on her part. The sheer number of messages between her and Daniel, work, that contact name was another knife to the gut, was staggering. They texted constantly, from early morning until late at night. The language was familiar, intimate, filled with inside jokes and pet names that were definitely not meant for me. Can't wait to see you. Missing your smile. Last night was amazing. Every single message was like a hammer blow, chipping away at what little denial I had left. The strategy sessions were clearly dates. Dinners at restaurants I'd never even heard of. Afternoon get-togethers she'd passed off as supplier meetings. There were mentions of a little cottage Daniel apparently owned by a lake, a place they'd escaped to for a weekend planning retreat. Our weekend. The one she'd told me was a solo trip for her charity, a chance to recharge and focus. I had cooked for the kids, helped with homework, missed her, all while she was with him. The physical sickness that washed over me was overwhelming. I actually had to sit down, right there on our bedroom floor, the phone clutched in my hand like it was a venomous snake. The photos were worse. Selfies of them together, smiling, sometimes him kissing her cheek. Sarah looked happy. A different kind of happy than I'd seen in a long, long time. Younger, freer, like a weight had been lifted. It was such a cruel twist. To see her joy, and to know it came from my pain, from the destruction of our family. The evidence piled up over about 2 weeks. It was a grim, soul-destroying process. I became like a ghost in my own life, just going through the motions at work, with the kids, even with Sarah. I'd watch her across the dinner table, listen to her talk about her day, the parts she chose to share, anyway, and the hypocrisy of it all would just churn my stomach. How could she sit there, so calm, so normal, knowing what she was doing, knowing how much she was deceiving me? The emotional toll was huge. There was this searing anger, a white-hot rage that made me want to smash things, to scream, to confront her right then and there. Then there was this crushing sadness, a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. Grief for the marriage I thought we had, for the future I thought we'd share, for the trust that was now completely shattered. And under all of that, a confusing, shameful feeling of inadequacy. What had I done wrong? Why wasn't I enough? I swung back and forth between wanting to expose her immediately, to just unleash all the pain and fury I was carrying, and this desperate, foolish hope that it was all some horrible misunderstanding. But the evidence was just too damning, too consistent. The texts, the photos, the cleverly constructed lies that now fell apart under the harsh light of truth. It all painted a very clear, very ugly picture. The idea of the family dinner started to form in my mind. It wasn't a sudden decision, but this slow, creeping thought that took root and grew. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of the family, of the values we supposedly all shared. Her parents, who adored her and thought she was the picture of virtue. My parents, who had welcomed her like a daughter. Our siblings. Why that particular dinner? Because it was her stage. It was the event she organized, the symbol of the family unity she was so casually destroying. The thought of her presiding over that meal, radiating false warmth and sincerity while her lover's messages were still fresh on her phone, filled me with this cold fury. The secrecy that let the affair go on needed to be broken, and broken publicly. The fantasy had to be shattered. I began to plan the reveal with a grim sort of precision. I copied the most incriminating messages and photos onto a USB drive. I even printed some of them out, the stark black and white of the text messages looking like an indictment. It felt surreal, like I was preparing for some courtroom drama, not the implosion of my own life. I was on autopilot, driven by this need for the truth to be known, for the charade to end. The days leading up to the fall harvest dinner were the hardest. I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to help with preparations, listen to Sarah talk excitedly about the menu, watch her pick out the perfect tablecloth. Every interaction was a fresh wave of pain and disgust. The nights were sleepless, my mind replaying conversations, imagining the confrontation, the fallout. I felt this strange mix of dread and a twisted kind of anticipation. This D-Day was coming, and I knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. I was about to lift the fog of secrecy, and I had no idea if any of us would find our way through the storm that was about to break. Those 24 hours before the dinner? A blur of forced smiles and a stomach doing gymnastics. Every little everyday thing with Sarah felt loaded. Each word she spoke, each casual touch, felt like a spark on dry wood. I found myself studying her, searching for any flicker of guilt, any tiny sign that she knew her carefully built world was about to come crashing down. But there was nothing. Just that same calm, almost angelic smile she always had for family occasions. It was chilling. I remember her fussing over the seating arrangement, a small, handwritten chart in her hand. Should we put your mom next to Uncle Michael? Or would she prefer to be closer to Emily? She'd asked, her brow all furrowed in concentration. I just nodded, couldn't really form words. The sheer ordinariness of it, set against the monumental secret I was carrying, was almost unbearable. How could she be so wrapped up in such trivial things while living such a massive lie? That evening, I barely slept. I lay there beside her in the dark, the gap between us wider than the actual space separating our bodies. I could hear her steady breathing, the picture of innocence, and a fresh wave of rage and sorrow just washed over me. I thought about the kids, asleep in their rooms down the hall, totally unaware of the earthquake that was about to rip their world apart. The thought of their pain, their confusion, was a physical ache. I replayed the plan in my head, over and over. When would be the right moment? Not too early, let the illusion of normalcy settle in first. Maybe after the main course, just as dessert was being served. A sweet ending to a bitter truth. I had the USB drive in my pocket, the printed copies tucked away in my briefcase. It felt like carrying a live grenade. The morning of the dinner, the house smelled amazing, roasting turkey, baking pies. Sarah was in her element, a whirlwind in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. She seemed genuinely happy, excited even. Was this all an act? Or had she managed to compartmentalize her life so well that she could truly slip into this role of the perfect wife and hostess, completely untroubled by her deceit? My parents were the first to show up, all cheerful and carrying a bottle of wine. My mom, Mary, immediately went to help Sarah in the kitchen, and soon they were laughing over some shared joke. My dad, John, clapped me on the shoulder. "Smells wonderful in here, son." Sarah's outdone herself again. I managed a weak smile. Every pleasantry felt like another knot tightening in my chest. Then Emily and David arrived, followed shortly by Sarah's parents, Tom and Linda, and her brother, Michael. The house filled with chatter, laughter, the clinking of glasses as I poured everyone a drink. I moved among them like a ghost, a silent observer of my own impending doom. Everyone was saying how lovely Sarah looked, how festive the house felt. I nodded, smiled, made small talk, all while the evidence in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole right through my pants. I watched Sarah with her parents. Linda, her mother, looked at her with such pride, such pure love. Tom, her father, was his usual jovial self, teasing her, ruffling her hair. Seeing their affection for her, their complete ignorance of what was about to happen, was almost more than I could stand. They were all about to be thrown into the middle of our marital train wreck. There was this one moment, just before we all sat down to eat, when Sarah caught my eye across the room. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile, the kind that used to make my heart skip a beat. For a split second, I hesitated. Could I really do this? Could I shatter this perfectly crafted illusion, not just for her, but for everyone here? Could I inflict that much pain? Then I remembered the messages, the photos, the casual cruelty of her betrayal. I remembered the nights I'd lain awake, sick first with suspicion, then with certainty. The anger returned, cold and hard, cementing my resolve. This wasn't just about my pain. It was about the truth. It was about ending the lie that had poisoned our lives. She had made her choices. Now, she would face the consequences. The public exposure was meant to shatter the fantasy of the affair, bring the truth out into the open, and make it a lot harder for her to keep living a double life. As we all moved towards the dining room, the atmosphere was light, full of anticipation. The table looked magnificent, a real testament to Sarah's efforts. Candles flickered, silverware gleamed, and the centerpiece of autumn leaves and gourds glowed warmly. It was the perfect picture of family harmony. A beautiful, fragile lie, just moments away from being utterly and irrevocably destroyed. D-Day was here. We all took our seats. The conversation flowed pretty easily at first, typical family dinner stuff. Work, what the kids were up to, upcoming holiday plans. Sarah, at the head of the table opposite me, was radiant, the perfect hostess. She laughed, she chatted, she made sure everyone's glass was full. I just watched her, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. Every smile, every cheerful comment, felt like another layer of hypocrisy. The main course was served, that magnificent roast turkey, all the side dishes. Compliments were flying around the table. "Sarah, this is the best turkey ever," my father declared. "Everything is just delicious, dear," her mother chimed in. Sarah beamed, brushing off the praise with that practiced modesty of hers. I ate like a robot, barely tasting the food. My heart was hammering against my ribs, this frantic drumbeat against the background of polite conversation. I kept my hand near my pocket, feeling the outline of the USB drive. The weight of it felt immense. I glanced around the table, at the faces of my family, Sarah's family. Their smiles, their unsuspecting expressions. This was it. No turning back now. The plates were cleared, the remnants of the feast taken away. There was a lull in the conversation, that comfortable pause before dessert would be announced. This was the moment. The perfect, terrible moment. I cleared my throat. It was a small sound, but it seemed to cut right through the relaxed atmosphere. All eyes turned to me. I saw a flicker of surprise in Sarah's eyes, maybe a hint of unease. "Before we have dessert," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, even though my insides felt like a raging inferno. "There's something I need to share. Something you all deserve to know." A hush fell over the table. The air crackled with sudden tension. I could see confusion on my parents' faces, concern on Emily's. Sarah's smile faltered, replaced by a look of wary apprehension. "For the past few months," I continued, my gaze fixed on Sarah, "I've been living with a very painful secret. A secret about Sarah." Her eyes widened. A flush started to creep up her neck. "Mark, what are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low and urgent. I ignored her. "It turns out," I said, my voice gaining strength, "that Sarah's charity work and her late nights at the office have been a cover for something else entirely." The shock around the table was palpable. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah's father, Tom, looked from me to Sarah, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Mark, stop it," Sarah said, louder this time, a note of panic in her voice. "This isn't the time or the place." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time and place," I countered, my voice cold. "This family, this dinner, is built on the idea of honesty, of togetherness. Values that you, Sarah, seem to have forgotten." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive, holding it up for everyone to see. "I have here, and also in printed copies for anyone who doubts, irrefutable proof that Sarah has been having an affair." Gasps. My mother started to cry softly. Linda, Sarah's mom, looked utterly devastated, her face pale. "No," she whispered. "Sarah, no." Sarah's face was now ashen. "Mark, don't do this," she pleaded, her eyes darting around at the horrified faces of our family. This public humiliation was clearly hitting home. "His name is Daniel," I stated, letting the name hang in the air. "They've been meeting secretly for months. Dinners, weekends away, all while she's been lying to me, to all of you." I then took out the printed messages and photos. I didn't hand them around, not yet. I simply placed the small stack on the table in front of me. "The evidence is quite extensive," I continued, the calmness of my voice a stark contrast to the storm inside me. "Text messages, Sarah. Hundreds of them, describing your strategy sessions. Photos of you together. Looking quite happy, I might add." Sarah stared at the papers, then at me, her expression a mixture of fury and terror. "How could you?" she finally choked out. "How could you do this to me, to us, in front of everyone? How could I?" I shot back. The control I'd maintained finally starting to crack. How could you, Sarah? How could you betray 15 years of marriage? How could you lie to our children? To our families? The dinner table had indeed imploded. Sarah's mother, Linda, was openly weeping now, her husband Tom trying to comfort her, though his own face was a mask of bewildered pain. My father looked stunned, his gaze fixed on Sarah with a look of profound disappointment. My sister Emily looked shocked and heartbroken. Sarah's brother, Michael, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Mark, are you sure about this? This is a pretty heavy accusation. I wish I weren't, Michael, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Believe me, I wish none of this was true. I gestured to the papers. But the proof is undeniable. Sarah suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this, she cried, her voice trembling with rage and shame. You had no right. She looked around at her family, her eyes pleading. He's twisting things. It's not what it looks like. Pure denial. Then explain it, Sarah, I challenged, my voice rising. Explain the messages. Explain the photos. Explain Daniel. She couldn't. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking trapped and exposed. The vibrant, confident hostess of an hour ago was gone, replaced by a crumbling wreck. Her mother, Linda, finally found her voice, raw with anguish. Sarah? Is this true? Tell me this isn't true. Sarah looked at her mother, and something in her seemed to break. She didn't answer, just let out a sob, and then she turned and fled. She didn't grab her coat, didn't say a word. She just ran from the room, the sound of the front door slamming shut echoing through the stunned silence. The act of exposing an affair in such a public, high-stakes setting is designed to break the secrecy, and in that moment, the secrecy was absolutely shattered. The immediate fallout was chaos. My mother was crying uncontrollably. Sarah's father was pale, looking like he'd aged 10 years and 10 minutes, muttering, I don't believe this. My Sarah. Her mother was inconsolable. Emily got up and came to my side, placing a hand on my arm, her own eyes filled with tears. David, her husband, just looked grim. Michael seemed torn, looking from the empty doorway Sarah had disappeared through, to me, to his distraught parents. You could feel the outrage, grief, and confusion from everyone. The carefully planned fall harvest dinner was in ruins. The food sat uneaten, the festive decorations now a mocking backdrop to the devastation. I had laid out the undeniable proof, and the sheer shock and raw reactions had ignited an unforgettable firestorm. The truth was out, in the most painful and public way possible. The silence Sarah left behind was heavy, just thick with unshed tears and unspoken blame. It was only broken by my mother's soft sobs and Linda's heartbroken cries. Tom, Sarah's father, just sat there, staring blankly at Sarah's empty chair, his face like ash. It was a picture of utter devastation. My father was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. Mark. I don't know what to say. He looked completely defeated. The man who always had advice, always knew how to fix things, was just lost. Emily squeezed my arm. Are you okay? She whispered. I couldn't answer. Was I okay? I had just detonated my life, and the lives of everyone in this room. Vindication felt pretty hollow when the cost was this high. I felt a mix of that, yeah, but also relief that the secret was finally out, and then this creeping guilt as the full impact on the family really hit me. Linda, Sarah's mother, finally turned to me, her eyes red and swollen, blazing with a mother's pain. Why, Mark? Why like this? In front of everyone? Couldn't you have spoken to her privately? To us. It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself 1,000 times. Because, I said, my voice tired, the secrecy was killing me. And this affair wasn't just a private thing between me and Sarah anymore. It was built on lies that affected all of us, our whole family. You all deserve to know who she really is, what she's been doing. But our grandchildren. Linda choked out, thinking of our kids. That's always the first worry, isn't it? I don't know, I admitted, the weight of that reality pressing down hard. But living in a house built on lies wouldn't have been good for them either. Slowly, the dinner party just fell apart. Sarah's parents were the first to go, Tom practically carrying a distraught Linda out the door. No goodbyes, just the heavy shuffle of feet and the quiet click of the door closing behind them. It felt like a permanent break. Michael lingered for a moment. He looked at me, his expression impossible to read. "I need to go check on my sister," he said finally, and then he too was gone. I wondered if he was angry, if he blamed me for how I did it, or if he was just reeling from the shock of his sister's actions. Siblings often take sides, or at least struggle with where their loyalties lie in situations like this. My own parents stayed a little longer. My mother made tea, her hands trembling. My father kept pacing the dining room, occasionally stopping to stare at the scattered prints of the messages on the table. He looked older, more frail than I'd ever seen him. "Son," he said, finally stopping in front of me. "This is a terrible, terrible thing. For everyone." He paused. "But you did what you felt you had to do. The truth, well, sometimes the truth is brutal." Emily and David helped clear the table, festive food now looking like some kind of cruel joke. The atmosphere was thick with a grief you could almost touch. Our family dynamic was altered, instantly and probably forever. When my parents finally left, their faces etched with worry and sadness, Emily stayed behind for a few minutes. "What now, Mark?" she asked softly. I sank into a chair, the adrenaline finally draining away, replaced by this aching exhaustion. "I have no idea, Em. I genuinely have no idea." The path forward, whether it was towards trying to fix things or splitting up, had definitely begun with this explosive moment. The house felt enormous, empty. The smell of the feast still lingered, a ghostly reminder of what should have been a happy occasion. I walked through the silent rooms, picking up a discarded napkin here, straightening a tilted picture there. It was like I was trying to restore order to a scene of complete chaos, an impossible task. Sarah didn't come back that night. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I imagined her with Daniel, maybe, or hiding out with a friend who knew about her secret life. Not knowing was another kind of torture. I went into the kids' rooms, watched them sleep, their innocent faces untroubled. A fresh wave of guilt washed over me. How would I ever explain this to them? How could I protect them from the shrapnel of their parents' shattered marriage? The feeling of losing control was immense, not just for Sarah, but for me too, as our private crisis had now dragged the entire family into it. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the printed evidence of Sarah's affair spread out on the coffee table. The firestorm I had started had burned brightly, and now, in the quiet aftermath, all that was left was smoke and ashes. D-Day was over. The secrecy was broken. But the war? That was just beginning. This whole journey has been incredibly tough, and sharing it isn't easy. If you've ever faced a similar betrayal or had to deal with a devastating family secret, I'd genuinely be interested to hear how you handled it, what you learned. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone is the first step towards feeling a bit better. Leave a comment below. Your story might actually help someone else going through their own storm. And if you want to follow how this all continues to unfold, maybe think about subscribing. The days after that disastrous dinner were a blur of hushed phone calls, strained silences, and the heavy weight of what had happened. That firestorm of raw emotion didn't just die down after everyone left. It smoldered, sending up these plumes of anger, grief, and blame that choked the air for weeks. Sarah eventually got in touch, not with me directly at first, but through a blunt text message to Emily, asking for some of her things. She was staying with a friend, she said. No apology, no explanation, just a cold, practical request. It felt like another slap in the face, her refusal to even acknowledge the devastation she'd caused. Her anger was clear, even coming through a third person. My parents called every day, their concern a constant, gentle pressure. My mother, bless her, tried to play peacemaker, to find some path through the wreckage. Perhaps counseling, Mark? For both of you? For the children's sake? But the gap felt too wide, the betrayal too deep. How do you even start to rebuild trust when its very foundations have been turned to dust? Sarah's parents were a different story. Linda, her mother, was heartbroken but also furious, with Sarah for the deceit, absolutely, but also with me for the public way I'd exposed it. She felt her daughter had been unforgivably shamed. Tom, her father, was quieter, withdrawn, like he couldn't reconcile the daughter he knew with the woman those printouts described. Family relationships weren't just strained, they were fractured, maybe for good. The hardest part was, and still is, the children. I tried to shield them as much as I could, but they're not stupid. They knew Mommy wasn't home. They knew something was terribly wrong. Trying to explain her absence, the tension in the house, without explicitly detailing the affair to young ears, was an exercise in agonizingly vague phrases. Mommy needs some time by herself right now. Mommy and Daddy are having some grown-up problems we need to figure out. Their confusion and quiet sadness were a constant ache in my heart. That's the burden of these adult choices. The kids inevitably carry some of its weight. About a week after the dinner, Sarah and I finally met. Not at home, no way, but in the sterile, impersonal setting of a coffee shop. She looked tired, her eyes puffy, but there was this new hardness in her expression. No tears this time, no begging for forgiveness. Instead, there was defiance. "You've humiliated me, Mark," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You destroyed any chance we had of working through this privately. You wanted to punish me, and you did. You destroyed us, Sarah," I shot back, trying to keep my own anger from boiling over. "You did that with every lie, every secret meeting, every message to him. The dinner? That was just me turning on the lights so everyone could see the truth you tried so desperately to hide." The conversation just went in circles. Accusations, blame, justifications. She admitted to the affair, but tried to downplay it, calling it a mistake, a symptom of our dying marriage, as if that somehow excused the profound betrayal. There was no real remorse, just anger at being caught and exposed. The fog I had hoped to lift for her seemed to have been replaced by this solid wall of resentment. It became pretty clear that getting back together, at least in any real way, was not going to happen. The damage was just too extensive. The trust, once the cornerstone of our lives, was gone, probably forever. Slowly, carefully, I began to navigate the practicalities of separation. Lawyers were called. Financial statements were gathered. The whole machinery of divorce started to grind, impersonal and relentless. Every step was a fresh reminder of the life we had lost, the future that would never be. Family dynamics stayed incredibly complicated. My sister, Emily, was a rock, so supportive and understanding. My parents, while still deeply saddened, focused on helping me and the children. Sarah's family, though, remained distant. Her mother eventually stopped speaking to me altogether. Her father would call occasionally, his conversations stilted and full of unspoken sorrow. Michael, her brother, seemed caught in the middle, trying to stay neutral, which, in its own way, felt like taking her side. The fault lines created that night had solidified into deep rifts. There were moments of profound loneliness, of just overwhelming grief. The house felt too big, too quiet. Memories would ambush me at unexpected times. A song on the radio, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in a closet, a photograph from happier times. Each one was a fresh stab of pain. But amidst all the wreckage, there were also these small glimmers of something else. A sense of clarity, maybe. The charade was over. The exhausting effort of living with suspicion, and then the weight of the secret, was lifted. There was a brutal honesty in our new reality, and in that, a strange kind of peace. I was no longer living a lie. The decision to reveal Sarah's affair at that family dinner was the hardest I've ever made. It was a desperate act, born of pain and this deep-seated need for truth. The consequences were immediate and far-reaching, a firestorm that consumed so much of what I held dear. But as the smoke continues to clear, I'm beginning to see that sometimes the only way to move forward is to burn down the past, especially when that past is built on deceit. The path ahead is uncertain, pretty daunting even, but it's a path I now walk in truth, however harsh that truth may be. So that's where things stand now. The pieces of our lives are still scattered all over the place, and we're all trying to figure out how, or even if, they can be put back together in some new way. The shockwaves from that dinner are definitely still rippling outwards. Exposing the affair so publicly was a choice with massive repercussions, a D-Day that irrevocably changed everything. It forced everyone to confront the reality of betrayal, and while it brought the truth to light, it undeniably deepened wounds and created rifts that will last. There are days I second-guess my decision, the way I chose to reveal it. But then I remember the suffocating weight of the lies, and I know I couldn't have continued to live under that shadow. This experience has taught me some really hard lessons about trust, betrayal, and just how fragile the relationships we often take for granted can be. It's shown me the incredible strength of family ties, and also how easily they can be damaged. Thank you for listening to this story. It's not one I ever imagined I'd be telling. If you've been through something similar, or if this resonates with you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, just knowing that others have walked a similar path can make the journey feel a little less lonely. Remember to like this video if you found this story compelling, and subscribe for more narratives and reflections on life's unexpected turns. Take care of yourselves and cherish the truth, even when it's painful.